Live from Africa and to the rest of the world, this is CII Radio, independent, authentic, and dedicated to you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Channel Islam International, and you are listening to Education Matters, a program which is presented by the CII Youth Foundation in conjunction with the Association of Muslim Schools. Alhamdulillah, we are blessed to have in the studios today my co-presenter. By the way, I am Ibrahim Mansoor, your presenter for this evening's program. And our co-presenter is Sheikh Irshad Ahmad. Sheikh Irshad is the Vice Chairman of the Association of Muslim Schools KwaZulu-Natal and an executive member of the Association of Muslim Schools of South Africa. We're also very pleased to have in the studio with us Brother Ahmad Bayat, ex-Department of Education KZN Curriculum Specialist. Assalamu alaikum to our brothers.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, Mr. Ansur, and our listeners.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ahmad will spend some time, inshallah, talking to you a little later. You must introduce yourself and tell the listeners exactly what your background is. And in particular, we're looking forward to an interesting discussion on our topic for this evening, which is comprehensive sexuality education. It's a very comprehensive, very controversial topic these days, and because the Department of Basic Education is insisting that in some form or the other, CSE must be taught in all schools from grade 4 upwards. We will be interrogating the background to this, and from the Islamic schools perspective, and for Muslim families in general, what are some of the ways in which we can deal with this rather controversial topic? On the line, we have Lauren Evandia. Good evening, Lauren. Are you on the line? Well, we're trying to link up with Lauren Evandia, who is one of the champions of Leave the Kids Alone, hashtag Leave the Kids Alone. Good evening, Lauren. Are you with us?
And hello to all the listeners. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can.
Hi.
Thank you very much for being patient while we link up with you. It's a long way from Windermere Road in Durban all the way to the Cape. Which part of the Cape are you from, by the way?
Well, I'm actually from the Eastern Cape, but I've been living in Cape Town for the past 10 years.
Okay. And which part of Cape Town?
In the northern suburbs.
Oh, okay. Very good. All right, Lauren. Just give us some idea about what prompted you to start this movement, hashtag Leave the Kids Alone.
It's hashtag Leave Our Kids Alone, and the reason I started the group was because I have 4 of my own children in junior school, and the thought of them learning a very warped, westernized, sexualized ideology that comes from the United Nations just sickens me, because it goes in direct contradiction to the values that I am teaching them. And I know that if this is rolled out across the country, it's going to destroy the future of our nation, because the youth are the future.
It's a very laudable, very noble objective that you have, and I think many of us would share some of your views. Although the question I'd like to pose, there was a time when we lived in very conservative, in a very conservative environment, when in apartheid South Africa, morality, fortunately or unfortunately in those days, morality was at an all-time high of morality of sorts. The issues around sexuality weren't seen as so much as of a problem as it is today. Nowadays, children have access to more information than you and I ever had when we were young. With the advent of social media, etc. Yes. But please just give us a background as to what your intentions are and how do you intend to conscientize people about this project?
Okay, well, the one thing I would like to just add to your comment about the access children have to information and social media, parents give that access, and parents can take that access away. And it's up to parents to make responsible choices. With Leave Our Kids Alone, one thing I'd like to clarify is that the Department of Basic Education keeps on saying that the content in the new material does not sexualize children. But I want to say that no matter how many times you repeat a lie, it does not become the truth. And if anyone takes it upon themselves to read the scripted lesson plans that have been funded by the United States Agency of International Development, if you read those SLPs, you will see that it does sexualize children. Every parent that I've come across that has read the material agrees, because it introduces sexual concepts to children as young as 9 and 10 years old who wouldn't normally be thinking about sexual activities. So the entire content is problematic, and it also normalizes a perverse and sick sexualized culture. And it undermines the rights of parents to be the ones to initiate sexual education on children. So we're dealing with various things. We have the ideology aspect, where the UN's Comprehensive Sexuality CSE is completely contrary to most conservative cultures and religions in South Africa. Then you have the political implication, where the forcing of CSE in a compulsory curriculum is undermining the rights of parents to be the primary caregivers and educators of their children. And Angie Macheko herself has said that children are the government's responsibility, which, in my opinion, is a complete violation of human rights and individual liberty, which we are supposed to have in our democracy.
Lauren, we're very fortunate that we have in the studio an education specialist, an ex-curriculum specialist from the Department of Education, who is involved very heavily. He may have one or two comments or questions. Mr. Ahmed Bayat, who is working with life orientation as well as CSE. Just to tell you that we, when I say we are talking about the Association of Muslim Schools, which is the host of the program that we have this evening, are also concerned about all the reports we've read. There has been obviously quite a bit of research done, and we are also exploring ways and means in which we can negotiate the government's, try and find a balance between what the government wants to do and between our own value system. So I'm just sure whether
I don't think a balance can be obtained. We need to fight this, and we need to stand up as parents and as individuals and as leaders and tell the government no, because we have that democratic right. We are the voters, we are the electorate, and they need to listen to us. So there's no negotiating going on here, and Leave Our Kids Alone has that policy of not negotiating with the enemy, and the government has declared themselves an enemy to us and to our children. We are not backing down. It needs to be removed from the schools completely, because it will enforce the complete annihilation of this country, and that is exactly what the United Nations wants. And our government, unfortunately, is being used as a puppet by the United Nations.
All right. Ahmed, do you have any questions for Lauren or any comments you'd like to make?
I'd love to hear his comments.
I'd like to just put this CSE into perspective. Our country faces a huge challenge with regard to HIV/AIDS and teenage pregnancy. The stats are staggering. If you look at the number of, I'm looking at the 2017 stats from the Statistician General. 97,000, just over 97,000 teenagers gave birth to children. Of them, just over 3,000 were between the ages of 10 and 14.
That's shocking.
And together with that, we have rampant HIV and AIDS, which is decimating our youth. So it's with this background that government sees it necessary to introduce CSE, because from the year
obviously
2000,
the government is failing. They cannot see the fact that 10 to 14-year-olds are pregnant and having HIVs. It means people are raping them. There are grown men raping them. So why not fix the justice system? Why not fix up social services? Why not pump money into making sure there are social workers in every school? There are so many alternatives other than CSE. And what you said, sir, is exactly what the United Nations directs every single government across the world, in Canada, in Australia, and in America, to say. So you're following their script 100%, because you're saying exactly what the spokesperson says, exactly what the minister says, and it's a script you are following. And that statistic you gave me with regards to teenage pregnancies, if I'm not mistaken, isn't even a percentage of teenage girls. So what we are dealing with when you're talking about the pregnant teenagers, it's not because their parents aren't teaching them about sex. It's because their parents are not teaching them values of chastity and abstinence. And we need to look at that issue of parents failing their children and failing to teach their children essential values that will help them become successful individuals one day. You cannot teach victims about sex when they are victims of sexual crimes. And you cannot teach victims about sex when they are being exploited by perpetrators that are running free because our justice system is failing us and the people of South Africa.
All right. Lauren, I also have in the studio Sheikh Irshad Ahmad, an educationist himself and a member of the Association of Muslim Schools. Sheikh, would you like to
Good
comment?
evening, Lauren. I just got one question here. I mean, I can hear the passion that you are talking about this issue. Is there an agenda that the UN has regarding this? Maybe, some of our listeners are unsure. Is there an agenda that the UN has regarding this CSE?
Well, you'll have to look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And I would recommend that every person listening to this radio interview goes and does their own research. The United Nations doesn't hide what they are doing. And they think what they are doing is wonderful, but they are doing it at the expense of the freedom of the people. And if you look at what's happening in Canada and Australia and America, because they are probably 10 or 20 years ahead of us with comprehensive sexuality education, if you look at the trend, there are more children that are confused, more children that are becoming transgender, not because that they were, not because they were born like that, because it's an agenda that's being pushed. Because at the end of the day, it's going to enrich certain corporations and it's going to destroy nations. What the United Nations depends on, because if you look at it as a business, what they depend on is broken countries and weak nations. And how do you disempower a country? You attack the family values. It's a simple principle. You attack a country by attacking the family, because a strong family is built upon strong families. A strong country, is built upon strong families. And we can see that attack happening. The government is doing a job attacking family through poverty and perpetuating the cycle of poverty. And the UN is just going and making it so much worse by attacking the very basic family structure, by attacking gender norms, by saying things like you can be a boy and identify as a girl, and be a girl and identify as a boy, and then still say it's wrong to teach otherwise. That is an attack on the family unit, and we as religious people need to stand up for what is right, what is biological fact, the fact that there are men and there are women, and men and women should be married, and that's okay, and that's not politically incorrect. But our society is telling us that it's politically incorrect, and we need to stand up for those religious principles and religious values. Otherwise, we're going to see ourselves as slaves in the next 10 or 20 years.
We agree entirely with you, Lauren. We also, this dilemma, which is a constitutional right now of us to recognize gay relationships and LGBT rights, we're also grappling with that, because obviously, in terms of the Constitution, LGBT has that community has a right to its freedom of choice. However,
I agree that they can have that right. They can have that right, but what we say is leave our kids alone. Don't put those teachings in a compulsory curriculum. That's what we're saying. Leave our kids alone. Let us raise our kids according to our own values. Don't force it on us. Where there are issues, where there are problems, make sure that social workers are employed to identify problem children, to identify homes where there's child abuse and child neglect, and deal with that on a social services basis, not in a compulsory state education, not part of a compulsory curriculum. And I don't think people fully outweigh the impact that's going to have, because children are going to learn comprehensive sexuality education for a span of 8 years. And as the Department of Basic Education says themselves, CSE is not sex ed, and it's not merely teaching kids about puberty. It's so much more than that. It's teaching them about sexuality, about relationships, about abuse, but in such a way that it's going to warp their very concept of the sacredness of the sexual act itself. And we're going to see if this actually goes through, and if this actually becomes something that's implemented. In less than 10 years, we're going to see the complete breakdown of South Africa.
Lauren, I must thank you so much for bringing so much of passion to this topic, and we wish you well in your endeavors. Obviously, this is not going to be the last word on the topic, because there are so many opinions about this. When you talk of social welfare, looking at the magnitude of the problem that we have in our country, where we have such a large percentage of people reliant on the social welfare grants, it gives you some idea of the scale of the magnitude of the challenge that faces the government. But Lauren, we wish you well. Thank you so much for contributing to our program, and may you be blessed.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the listeners. And I really implore all the listeners to please go do your research. Go look on leaveourkidsalone.co.za, where you can download the scripted lesson plans for yourself, which come from the Department of Basic Education. Read them and see what the department wants to teach your children. They are taking our power as parents away from us. This is a very urgent matter. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. That was Lauren Evandia, who is one of the founders of this hashtag. It's a movement called Leave Our Children Alone. Dear listeners, we will be going for an ad break, after which we are going to engage Ahmad Bayat and Sheikh Irshad Ahmad on a response to what Lauren had to say, and specifically from the Islamic perspective, how do we tackle this very thorny problem, inshallah.
From our headquarters in Johannesburg, South Africa, to the rest of Africa, this is CII Radio Live.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Education Matters on Channel Islam International, a program brought to you by CII, Youth Foundation, and the Association of Muslim Schools. We were having a very interesting and spirited discussion with Lauren Evandia on the issue of CSE and her perspective that this is an United Nations sponsored attempt to undermine our country and to destroy the fabric of our society. Ahmed, what's your response to that?
Look, to a certain extent, I would agree that there is certain material in the CSE learner books that certain people may find offensive. But we need to look at the big picture here, and that is that these stats that I quoted earlier, they're not a thumbsuck. This is a reality that is affecting our country, that is affecting our economy, and people are dying. Now, we have different social structures in our country. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We have what we would call a traditional family with parents and children. And then we have a large number of families that are child-headed families. There's no parent there. And who teaches those kids? So these are the children that are exposed, that become victims of sexual abuse and sexually transmitted infections and so on. So government has taken this step to intervene, to break the cycle of abuse, and to educate learners about their sexuality. Now, that as a goal in itself is fine. But as people say, the devil is in the details. So as our guest earlier was saying, I think it is necessary for every parent to read the documentation. It's freely available on the government's website. You go to CSE and you can download the learner book and the educator's guide for each grade from grade 4 to grade 12. And it's very important also that we read the foreword in the educator's guide, which is from the Minister of Education herself, Minister Angie Motsecha. Read it very carefully because it speaks to the role of the parent. And it says that parents play an integral part in the education of their children. And there needs to be consultation with parents. So it's not that parents have been completely sidelined and ignored, but parents need to take, they need to use their right, and they need to use their responsibility so that they can make the necessary input into what is being taught to their children. So I would suggest that the first thing parents do is they go and read the necessary documentation.
Okay. Thanks, Abid. Listen, we're very fortunate we have Mufti Sheikh Irshad in the studio. Mufti Sheikh, from the Islamic perspective, I mean, as a teacher of Islamiyat, how should Muslim parents respond to this challenge?
Ibrahim, I think, the most important thing regarding sexuality, education, in schools in general, Islam, say la haya fid din. There is no shame in religion. And I think, through the different syllabi laid out by the different organizations in South Africa and throughout the world, alhamdulillah, they have directly and indirectly approached this topic. For example, when the child is reaching the age of bulugh, so we have these topics being taught in the Islamiyat department.
I must differ with you. I am, quite young.
Yeah.
But in my young days when I was in school, nobody, no alim, it was taboo. It was never discussed.
Yeah, well,
sexuality education was never discussed.
Well,
my parents also, the kind of tradition that we were brought up in, we were left to learn about the birds and the bees
by yourselves. Yeah. No, I think
so. I mean, I know there was a book called Beheshti Zevar for the ladies. Right. Fortunately, it was in Urdu, so we never were able to understand.
No, I think.
But are we not burying our heads in the sand? I mean, this is something that our Islamiyat department
No, I think,
should look at.
Ibrahim, I mean, me myself being an educator, I mean, we run programs, we run workshops now even for young boys and young girls. For example,
But it was never done in the past.
No. I mean, in the past, obviously, there were a lot of taboos. I mean, even amongst the Christians, amongst the Jews, there were a lot of taboos. I mean, you couldn't talk about anything. I mean, if you even thought about a girlfriend in those days, I mean, you thought about it, the thought will hurt you, because you worried. And I mean, let's be honest, those days our values were up in there, I mean, if you were seen by your neighbor, Mr. Naidu, walking a girl home, I mean, in the evening, the whole town, knows about it, that you were walking this girl home. But obviously, things have changed.
This is the point I want to make.
So that is why
it's a challenge that we are faced with now.
As there was an evolution in that aspect, so did the Islamiyat evolve also to address a lot of these issues. So I recall, at certain schools, or a number of schools, they have these workshops for our kids. Like, for example, those that are just going to become baligh. They start talking to them, openly, about, removing the hair from the private parts, what's going to happen to you. And when you get, for example, the wet dream, what to do. These things are being taught, these things are being discussed. Because, there are many parents, that are saying, we should be teaching this, or we don't know how to bring it up. But alhamdulillah, a lot of our parents have also become progressive in that way. I mean, I recall one of my own friends. He told his wife, listen here, my daughter is about to get baligh. You get into that bathroom and you teach her what to do. If not, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
So, I mean, these things are happening.
Alhamdulillah. So the point I'm making is that we must look at this as a way of addressing the issues and not saying that, listen, this is not for us, because it's a necessity in this day and age that we've got to present it obviously from within the Islamic perspective, but it has to be tackled in some form or the other, not quite the explicit manner in which is being suggested.
I mean, I think, a lot of the issues are dealt. I mean, example, if your life orientation is, a Muslim, he's educated in the deen, a lot of issues he's able to present the issues to our Muslim kids with an Islamic perspective on it, and ensure that, I mean, let's just take a simple thing about dating, which they speak about very openly in this book, and what is the Islamic perspective on dating? I mean, I think the Quran is very clear on this. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. I mean, the Quran never says لَا تَرْتَكِبْ الزِّنَا, don't go and commit it. They say don't go near it. Yeah. I mean, if you take a hot knife near butter, don't expect nothing to happen. Something's going to happen. So at the end of the day, we need to ensure that the aspect of dating or whatever it may be, touching or whatever, is, as Lauren was saying, it's the values that we need to teach our kids at the end of the day.
Okay. The Sheikh, let's get to our specialist here now. Ahmed, now you've been involved, just for the benefit of the listeners, just give the listeners a very, very brief background of who Ahmed Bayat is.
Okay. Up to last year, I was a subject advisor for life orientation in the Pinetown district. Also made representations at national level, and I was involved in the monitoring and evaluation of the scripted lesson plans for grades 10, 11,
so
and 12.
You were responsible for all the diagrams.
Actually, Babu, there were heated discussions in the planning stages, not only from myself, but from other officials of the department as well, that some of the content is very explicit, and there will be communities, very conservative communities such as rural communities, not just religious communities, that would have objections to some of the material that is in the scripted lesson plans. So I've been in it from the time that the lessons have been practiced in our sample schools. It's not rolled out yet. There are schools that have been selected by the Department of Education together with USAID, and they are running pilot programs. Now,
if I may just stop you there, one always asks this question.
Yeah.
Does the US have some kind of vested interest in introducing things like this? Why are they supporting things like this? As Lauren is suggesting, is this really an insidious way of undermining what we are doing in this country?
Well,
do you think?
Look, if you look at the values that are implicit in the scripted lesson plans, they do undermine religious values, and USAID doesn't strengthen religious values anywhere in the world. It's a liberal approach, and when you look at the lessons in that light, you will find that yes, the values have been divorced from the content. And when we look at this, that's why when we look at the scripted lesson plans from a religious perspective, we have a problem. Because let's say they talk about abstinence. Abstinence, even the foreword of the minister says abstinence is the cornerstone of scripted lesson plans of a CSE. However, it doesn't go into any detail about how abstinence should be practiced. And our Sheikh has just given us examples. La taqrabu zina is one of the teachings of the Quran. Then we have the separation of the sexes. We have dress code that men are not allowed to imitate women and vice versa. So from an Islamic perspective, a whole lot can be taught regarding abstinence, so that the child really understands from an early age why abstinence is taught in Islam. But if we go to look at the scripted lesson plans as they are, there can be, and it will lead to a situation where the learner is going to question the religious values if the religious values are not put into proper perspective. So I think that's a challenge that our community will have to face, that how do we infuse values into CSE?
Now, Ahmed, this is going to be taught as part of life orientation.
Yeah.
So how much of time are schools expected to spend on it?
Look, if you count the number of scripted lesson plans, it's about 8 lessons in grade 10, about the same in grade 11 and grade
8 for the year.
8, 7 and 7 in grade 12 for the year. Now it falls under the theme development of self in society. However, if you look at the CAPS document, that is policy. There's no way that a teacher can get away from teaching that. However, the scripted lesson plans are a guide. I'm looking at the foreword of the minister herself in the educator guide, and it says this guide will ensure that engagement with learners on sexuality education is age appropriate and relevant to each grade. So the scripted lesson plans as they stand are a guide to the teacher.
Okay, so it's not prescriptive.
It's not.
Right, just hold that thought,
policy.
Ahmed. We'll just visit the marketplace and we'll be back inshallah shortly.
CII Radio, where broadcasting perfection comes standard.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Education Matters on Channel Islam International. This is Ibrahim Mansoor with the studio guest, my co-presenter Sheikh Irshad Ahmad and brother Ahmed Bayat from the Department of Education. Ahmed, we were talking just before the break about the lessons and your involvement in CSE. And the question that we want to ask is, how should Muslim schools implement CSE? Or
that's a tough one.
Or should they implement?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. I think we can't, as Sheikh was saying earlier, we can't bury our heads in the sand and say, well, problems don't exist even in the Muslim community. So there's quite a bit from the comprehensive sexuality education which is beneficial, like critical thinking, decision making, problem solving, and those skills can be applied to relationships. I'm talking about general relationships like friendship, parent-child relationships, teacher-learner relationships. But if you look at the grade 10 scripted lesson plans, it brings in something that is not mentioned in the CAPS document specifically, and that is romantic relationships. Now, here, if you look at it from the Islamic perspective, clearly that's a no-no. So these are the kinds of challenges that Muslim schools, Muslim parents, and Muslim children will face when we look at a CSE. So while the whole package may be considered for implementation, there are certainly several aspects from the lessons that will not be acceptable to any faith-based community.
You know, if I may just stop you, what strikes me now is that, we as educators, we'd love all our children to get distinctions.
Yeah.
And generally, life orientation is a subject in which most of our children get distinctions.
Yeah.
How will the introduction of CSE impact on Muslim children if there are sections on sexuality education that we're not going to cover?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, Babu. Firstly, I don't think kids need to worry about that aspect right now. I'll tell you why. before any changes are made to the content of what's going to be examined, it has to be reflected in what we call the exam guidelines. So exam guidelines are revised every 3 years or so in every subject, including life orientation. At this point in time, there are no changes in the exam guidelines. So we have...
So what's the timeline for this to be introduced? Are you looking at...
Matric level.
Up to matric. When will it start?
It's going to be implemented simultaneously in all grades. That is from grade 4 to grade 12. It's not simultaneously. It's not a staggered approach like we had with CAPS, right? I spoke to some of my ex-colleagues this morning just to check whether implementation has gone ahead. They said no, not yet. They are still busy with the pilot stage, and they are getting feedback from the schools that.
So maybe in 2 or 3 years.
Possibly in 2 or 3 years. I don't think within the next 2 years. Also, what's very important with the scripted lesson plans is that the quality of training for the teachers is key. I mean, if you look at grade 9, the lesson is very explicit.
So is that where all the graphic information is?
That's one of the grades where there's a lot of graphic information about actual use
the
of
Sex Act and so on.
Yes. So that kind of thing will have to be reviewed. It can't be taught exactly as it stands. And when you look at the demo lessons, it's what comes out very clearly is that the lesson can so easily go off track. And these are scripted lessons, mind you, where word for word is written down what the teacher must say. And still, in a practice session, the lesson can go horribly wrong.
See, Ahmed, from our perspective, speaking from the Association of Muslim Schools, and we provide direction to our schools, we certainly are not going to, even if the government says you are compelled, we won't do it.
Yeah.
So from the Muslim school perspective, although we are not talking about it's necessary to do some form of CSE, but we certainly are not going to follow the government.
No,
but what I am concerned about is that we have a relatively small percentage of Muslim children in Muslim schools.
Absolutely.
There's a large number of Muslim children who are in the state system.
Absolutely. And
so what happens to them?
Yeah, and that it's a double-edged sword, because those kids or any child, not only Muslim children, are going to have exposure to CSE in the mainstream schools. And that material is going to be made available and shared with children who are in the private schools. You can't keep it away from them. So what the Muslim community has to do is to arm our children, Muslim children, with the value system that will question the shortcomings of CSE. If we don't do that, then it will be the other way around, where they will question Islamic values.
Ahmed, if you can just come in there, regarding giving the children this information. Last week I had John Boswell here, and I asked him a question: can a grade 12 learner who is licensed drive a car to school? Because we are always having this problem at schools. And he says, he's come from a fairly liberal background also. He says, my personal view is I would not, because I'm giving a child a loaded gun. I'm telling him now, use it sparingly. You're giving a child a 100,000 rand car. He's not going to cruise at 40 kilometers an hour. Now suddenly, already our kids that are in the government schools or the Model C schools are already living a dichotomy. What the Sharia is saying and what the critical mass is saying, they're already living in a dichotomy. Now you're telling them, okay, let's deal with that dichotomy, and then you're adding fuel to the fire and saying, okay, if you have to be in a relationship, these are your limits.
Yeah.
Now you're telling a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old to make decisions that even a 30-year-old can't make sometimes, I think it's becoming problematic, where we are inviting issues into the minds of our children. And I think that's where the problem is. And I take, the words back of Dr. Ali, the late Dr. Ali Mazrui. And he says if you want to educate a child, it takes a whole village. At the moment, the village is split up.
Absolutely, yeah.
The village is split.
The village itself has no direction.
The village itself. So, I'm just looking at, for example, the grade 9 lessons, which we're speaking about a simple thing like condoms, being assertive and staying protected. What does a child do with that? Tell me. And then the other problem is, as you rightfully said, when the teacher is teaching, the thing can go horribly wrong.
Can.
You may get a guy, like, for example, I was once sitting with some managers of schools, and I just overheard one of my colleagues speaking, and he mentioned, my daughter's boyfriend is coming home this evening, and she's got issues with this guy, and I don't know how to handle it. Yeah, you got a manager that can't handle her own daughter. Now, how are you going to handle a question that's coming up there? So these are the problems that the educators, and if I'm liberal-minded on this, I can take those kids to another direction. I think that's where the issues are coming in.
I'm just thinking off the top of my head, the number of cases of teachers abusing children, sexually abusing children, even without CSE. Yes. I shudder to think what would happen when this becomes part and parcel of the curriculum.
On a practical level, it's very difficult. You imagine a young female teacher now having to teach this content to 15 and 16-year-old boys. It's going to be a serious problem.
Ahmad, the issue of the content, from your perspective, is there objectionable content in CSE? And can you give us some examples?
Yeah, no, definitely there is objectionable content. And one of them is the actual demonstration with the use of the condom. That's in grade 9, right? Yeah. And then in grade 10, you have this content on LGBT, which is on a completely different level. It's like it's information that is not necessary for the average person. Why so much of detail is necessary is difficult to understand, because it's an information overload. From an Islamic perspective, what is important is that each gender has its own identity, and those identities should not be mixed up. And this is what the LGBT agenda is, that it's fine that we should be accepting of these practices.
So apart from the actual comprehensive sexuality education, this is an element also which undermines our value system.
Yeah.
The LGBT. Sheikh?
I think it doesn't only undermine the Islamic values. I think it undermines the human values more than anything else. You're going to talk to a 13, 14-year-old, who's confused about a lot of issues. And now you're going to say, maybe, you're a woman waiting to come out. Yeah. How do you decide on things like this? Who gives you the right to decide on things like this? On informing our kids, there's a possibility there's a woman within you. This is what they want. They want to take you out of the closet when there's nothing in the closet. They're forcing something out. And I think this is certain things we need to take a stand on when it comes to your sexuality. Allah Ta'ala has created you as a male, and He's created you as a female. You don't expect to plant an apple seed and an orange to grow. It's not going to happen. وَلَا تَبْدِيلَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ. There's no changing the way Allah Ta'ala has made things. But these are as you mentioned earlier on, the lifestyle changes that they're forcing our kids to think about, to explore.
So the more I'm listening to you, the more I feel that we must agree with Lauren when she started off by saying that this must be opposed with all our might.
Just based on, if you look at your grade 9 content and your grade 10 content alone, it is very, very problematic. Like Ahmad is saying, the detail. The devil is in the detail. The devil is in the detail.
All right. Sheikh, we've got to pay the bills. I'm just getting a signal from our engineer brother, Dr. Anwar Jiwa. So we'll go to the marketplace, inshallah, and we'll continue and conclude in the next 10 minutes
Inshallah.
this interesting discussion, inshallah.
CII Radio, where broadcasting perfection comes standard.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our program Education Matters, in which we are discussing CSE, which is Comprehensive Sexuality Education. And we've had some very interesting discussions around this topic. But Ahmed, may I ask now, how do parents engage with CSE? What is their involvement? What is their stakeholder involvement?
Okay. I have here a quote from Education Minister Inji Motsekha. This was on Parent 24. And I'll just read out this one small extract. All learners in public schools receive set provisions as per the caps. That's, I said earlier, that's a policy. Parents have a right to opt out of the current curriculum, provided that they can produce an alternative curriculum that meets the required caps criteria for competence.
Okay.
So that was by the minister herself. So it's not only the Muslim community, there are the communities that have objections to some of the content. And if we can provide with the alternatives, then that's going to be fine. And this is where parents come in. Parents need to make it clear to schools that some content is objectionable and they do not want their children to be exposed to that content.
Okay, now I'm leaving the AM schools out of this because we're going to approach it differently. Now we're addressing parents of children who are in state schools, in public schools.
Yeah.
Should CSE become mandatory and the teachers have to teach it, the parents have a right to say that I do not want my child to be exposed to this and the other.
Parents do have a right, and it even in the educator guide of the scripted lesson plans, there's reference to the role of parents. Parents need to be consulted because they are the real stakeholders. It's their child, and they will decide ultimately what kind of exposure to sexuality education those children would have.
How do they go about it? Is it via the governing body?
Yeah, it's recommended that it should be done through the governing body.
Okay.
I must say that in the pilot stages, in some schools it went fairly well. In other schools, it didn't take off at all. So that's a real challenge. And all I can say is that parents should not sit back, do nothing, and say, well, somebody will take a decision on behalf of my child. There's too much at stake here. It's the well-being, the physical, emotional, psychological well-being of the child that we are talking about. So parents need to come to the party, and if they should go through the material for the relevant grade, and if they find that there's something there that is not suitable for their child, they should make that known to the school.
To the school via the governing body and the principals. Now, what about sexuality education in other countries? How are the people approaching it?
I've been doing some research, particularly in Muslim countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. And what I found is that generally parents are reluctant to speak about sexuality to the children, particularly from the ages of 13, 14 upwards. Earlier than that, they say they can manage. So sexuality education in these predominantly Muslim countries, not much has been done. Governments have said they are going to look into it, but not much has been done in terms of any alternative approach to comprehensive sexuality education. In the Western countries, of course, it's different. They've gone into greater detail, more explicit detail regarding CSE.
Ahmed, we have a couple of minutes, and I know AMS has approached you via our Muhammad Amra to develop a guide towards sexuality education in AMS schools. Tell us something about the project.
Okay, it's a parents' guide to a Muslim parents' guide to sexuality education, and we want to produce a book to guide parents on how to address these very sensitive issues with their own children. We envisage that this book will cover interaction between parent and child regarding sexuality up to the age of about 13, 14. But our research shows that beyond that, parents are uncomfortable about going into more detail. So that then we will cover with our own samples of scripted lesson plans.
Inshallah. Sheikh, I know UCSA has this Saturday has a program on CSE in Johannesburg. Your thoughts about this or any information?
No, I think, they've got certain scholars that are going to be dealing with this issue on sexuality. And obviously, the ulama will be taking a stand, with regards to this, because there are so many controversial issues. How do you start sifting it out? So I think this is what they're going to be debating and talking about, and obviously exposing the ulama to the content itself, and inshallah from there we should get a statement that will be coming out from UCSA, inshallah.
Inshallah. Dear listeners, I hope you found this evening's program interesting and informative, but I think I would like to leave the comment that Ahmad made. I'd like to just refresh what he said, that parents have a right to object to aspects of the CSE, and they should do it as vigorously as possible via the channels that they have. Inshallah, this is a work in progress, so let's watch the space, inshallah, and see what happens from here on, but we must be vigilant, inshallah. I'd like to thank our guest, Ahmad. You've done such magnificent work over the years and on this particular topic as well. We wish you well. Sheikh Irshad, Jazakallah for your contributions. And we'd also like to say Jazakallah khair to Dr. Anwar Jiwa, who is assisting us with the engineering this evening. Brother Anwar, Jazakallah khair. To the listeners, thank you very much for listening. Until the next program, Education Matters, next Monday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
CII Radio, where broadcasting perfection comes standard.